This horrific stabbing of a young woman in Charlotte has shocked the nation, sparked backlash, and is already being used by some to justify Donald Trump's threats to unleash his newly crowned Department of War on Democrat cities, starting with Chicago. The secret details we're now learning about a botched SEAL Team 6 raid at North Korea are wild. And what's really happening with Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, because the words aren't matching the actions on several fronts. We're talking about all of that on today's brand new Philip DeFranco show, you daily dive into the news, starting with this. This woman was stabbed to death on a train by this man in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it has sparked national outrage and very, very big conversations. Because, well, this actually happened last month. The video showing the moments before the attack, they were just released, and it's now tying into a lot of what else we're seeing in the country. Before we get into that part, we need to break down what exactly we know about what happened. So the woman here is a Ukrainian refugee named Irina Zarutska. She reportedly fled Kyiv in 2022, and on August 22nd, a little before 10 p.m., she boarded the Charlotte Area Transit System's Blue Line. She ended up sitting down right in front of the man who would end up taking her life, and you had a detective explaining in an affidavit what happened next, saying the train travels for approximately 4.5 minutes before the suspect pulls the knife from his pocket, unfolds the knife, pauses, then stands up and strikes at the victim 3 times. With him adding, blood visibly drips on the floor as the defendant walks away from the victim. The victim goes unresponsive shortly after the attack. There appears to be no interaction between the victim and defendant. And then as far as the killer, he is 34-year-old DeCarlos Brown. And a very big thing that's been highlighted here is that, according to reports, he has 14 previous court cases in just Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. And with those, you see things like in 2015, for example, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison for robbery with a dangerous weapon, breaking and entering, and larceny. You also have his mom telling reporters that he changed when he got home from prison, saying he started saying weird things. He started saying that he wasn't in his body, saying he became aggressive, and she was actually able to get an involuntary commitment order from the courts, and saying that when he underwent psychiatric monitoring for 2 weeks, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. But then ultimately, he ended up getting released, and he became so aggressive that she said she had no choice but to kick him out, leaving him homeless. And then as far as his most recent arrest, it was for misusing 911, where according to a January arrest record, he told responding officers that he believed someone gave him man-made material that was inside his body, controlling when he ate, walked, and talked. But despite all that, he was reportedly never hospitalized or jailed following that call, and his mom has actually blamed the court for allowing her son to be out in the community, knowing his previous arrests and mental health issues, and saying that Zarutska's death could have been prevented. But with all that said, as far as this guy, he's been charged with first-degree murder, and his lawyer said that he'll file a motion for an evaluation of his competency to stand trial because of his long history of mental health issues. And in the meantime, he's being held without bond, and his next court appearance is reportedly scheduled for September 19th. You know, while we wait to see how this case progresses, including if he's deemed fit to stand trial, I mean, we also have to talk about how this case has been covered, or rather not covered, and how that's part of the backlash that we're seeing. Because you're seeing places like Ground News saying that as of recording, the killing has been covered far more by right-wing media outlets, right? And then with that, you're seeing big social media accounts specifically accusing major national news outlets of not covering the situation because of the racial dynamics of the whole thing. Some then also contrasting it to the case of Daniel Penny. Right? Penny was that white guy who ended up choking to death a homeless man who was threatening passengers on a subway car in Manhattan in 2023. Right? And that ended up being a super high-profile case where a jury ultimately found him not guilty. So now you've got the situation where you have a black man killing a white woman, and you have accounts sharing lists of news outlets who hadn't yet covered the killing, and one adding, every single one of them wrote stories on Daniel Penny. Do you get it yet? You also had the likes of Benny Johnson writing, she ran from war in Ukraine, she came here for safety, and America failed her. Them adding, this wasn't random, this was preventable, there is a war on white people. Her blood is on the hands of a system that lets violent criminals roam while innocent people pay the price. If she were black and her killer white, the media would be rioting nonstop, but because she's white, they stay silent. This is evil and it's deliberate. With all that, one, you had some pushing back that he was actually concerned about a Ukrainian refugee, noting that he'd been previously revealed to have been paid indirectly by Russia as part of a secret political influence operation. Right? In that, in addition to a number of his other opinions that he shared. Two, you have many noting that right now, police have so far only said that the attack appeared to be random, right? Noting that the authorities haven't given any evidence to suggest that this was racially motivated. Though also, I'll say with that, not all of the backlash has been about race. Right? A lot of the focus has been on the fact that the killer had been arrested so many times, reportedly had a known mental illness, and was still out on the streets. So then with that, you had people like Elon Musk calling on his followers to name and shame the DAs and judges who enable murder, rape, and robbery, but especially shame those who funded the campaigns of the DAs and judges. You then had Congressman Randy Fine taking it even further, saying he has plans to introduce legislation to hold judges accountable if they release violent offenders who go on to later reoffend, and adding, those 12-plus judges that released DeCarlos Brown Jr. should have their day in court too. Right? And then finally, you had some really explicitly making this an attack on the Democratic Party, or just Democrats in general. And some of those attacks came from the very top, with White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who already recently called the Democratic Party a domestic extremist organization, now writing, the Democrat Party at every level, judges, politicians, academics, nonprofits, is organized around the defense and protection of the criminal, the monstrous, and the depraved. You then also had the Republican representing the area blaming what happened on decades of Democrat DAs and sheriffs putting their woke agendas above public safety, and adding, violent criminals commit crimes with impunity while families live in fear. And then finally, you had North Carolina Senate candidate Michael Whatley using the case to accuse his Democratic opponent Roy Cooper of being soft on crime, or with him pointing to an executive order that Cooper signed in 2020 when he was governor that established a racial profiling task force and sought to reduce reduce systemic racism, though it didn't call for the release of suspects. But then also, in addition to all that, this has raised some real questions, not only about Charlotte, but even I would say the nation's judicial system and the mechanisms in place for addressing mental health. Even this guy's mom said he should not have been out on the street, and maybe there are others. Last month, in fact, Charlotte police got into a shootout with a man described as acting erratically, and notably, the family had tried to get an involuntary commitment for that guy the day before, but a magistrate denied the request. And so then with all of that said, there is this question. Can we as a country move forward in a way where we address the issue, but also understand the number realities? Because one of the things we know is, just like nationwide, violent crime rates in Charlotte have actually been decreasing, at least as of July, when violent crime had decreased 25% compared to last year, and that was according to police. But that's also not to say that we can just dismiss the violent crimes that we just talked about. Well, you have many experts saying there is no real evidence linking crime trends to leadership by either political party. That in no way means you shouldn't expect Trump to try to use this incident as a way to justify cleaning up the streets across the country, potentially by using the military. Because while he still doesn't seem to have a firm grasp on all the details, saying the stabbing happened this morning or last night, he has suggested something needs to be done.
I just give my love and hope to the family of the young woman who was stabbed this morning or last night in Charlotte by a madman, a lunatic. Just got up and started. It's right on the tape. Not really watchable because it's so horrible, but just viciously stabbed. She's just sitting there. So they're evil people. We have to be able to handle that. If we don't handle that, we don't have a country.
And then with all that, you also had an advisor telling Axios, this is exactly what he's talking about, and it's going to be an issue he's going to highlight. This is not just about North Carolina. Other campaigns will deal with this. With him adding, crime is not a data thing. It's a feeling thing. It's not about whether you're a victim, it's about whether you feel you're a victim or not. But then next up in the news from that, we've got to talk about Trump's threats against the city of Chicago and his executive order to rename the Department of Defense the Department of War. And you had Trump saying that this new name demonstrates our ability and willingness to fight and win wars on behalf of our nation at a moment's notice, not just to defend. Now, a big note here is that Trump, he didn't come up with this name on his own. The Department of Defense actually used to be called that until after World War II, when the name was officially changed by Congress, which is actually a sticking point here. This name change, or so-called name restoration, it doesn't have congressional approval, which means it isn't official yet. In fact, Trump's executive order even acknowledges that, saying that the new name will be used as a secondary title to the current one. All of which then brings us to the reactions, and as you can imagine, there have been many, both positive and negative. But probably some of the most important ones were from those within the department itself, with former and current Pentagon officials telling Politico that this rebrand will cost ridiculous amounts of money for what they call a cosmetic change that isn't going to do much to address the big issues that the military is dealing with right now. Or things like countering an aggressive alliance of authoritarian nations, with one former defense official saying this is purely for domestic political audiences. Not only will this cost millions of dollars, it will have absolutely zero impact on Chinese or Russian calculations. Worse, it will be used by our enemies to portray the United States as warmongering and a threat to international stability. But hey, regardless, we're starting to see some changes already, like the rebranding on the department's social media. The website was changed from defense.gov to war.gov, and the word defense was actually scraped from the walls within the Pentagon. Even had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's title being changed to War Secretary, and several photos and videos and new signage outside of his office gaining traction online, though that's really just the beginning. Right? With all that, you've got officials saying they're expecting a long-term headache from all this. And I mean, there's so many different things that you might not even think of, because while the details of the order are still vague, right? You have to think about things like there's a chance that the department's going to have to change Defense Department seals on more than 700,000 facilities in 40 countries in all 50 states. And that, it includes everything from letterhead for 6 military branches and dozens more agencies, down to embossed napkins and feast halls, embroidered jackets for Senate-confirmed officials, and even knickknacks at the Pentagon gift shop. And so at the very least, it is not expected to be cheap, which has prompted its own backlash, even from supporters of the U.S. military, with some saying things like perhaps a significant amount of money spent making new signs, office placards, and letterhead would be better used ensuring our warfighters have the training and weapons they need to accomplish the missions they are given and to return home to their families. And all of this, I think it is worth noting, even though it is very likely falling on deaf ears, this move and Trump's justification for it are directly contradictory to the promises that he made of peace and ending all wars when he was on the campaign trail. Like, I know we live in an age of 2-second memories, but he was on the campaign trail saying he was the anti-war option. The White House just branded him as the president of peace last month. All of which had Pete Buttigieg saying it's an odd move from the president who worked so hard to convince his base that he was anti-war, though he then added, no doubt he'd rather have folks puzzling over this than thinking about his deep bond with Jeffrey Epstein. Which actually, I wasn't even going to talk about this today because it was just so ridiculous. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson over the weekend claimed that President Trump was an anti-Epstein FBI informant. I'll show you the clip.
He's not saying that what Epstein did is a hoax. It's a terrible, unspeakable evil. He believes that himself. When he first heard the rumor, he kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago. He was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The president knows and has great sympathy for the women who have suffered these unspeakable harms. It's detestable to him. He and I have spoken about this as recently as 24 hours ago.
Such a crazy statement. So crazy, it even looks like he looks directly like it's a sitcom over to the camera like, is anyone believing what I'm saying right now? I mean, it was such a crazy statement. Even the White House was like, we don't know what this man's talking about. And Johnson ended up, as much as he can, walking back that statement on Sunday. But back onto the topic of our war President Trump, something else that many say flies in the face of his President of Peace branding is that one of his first actions after the name change was threatening to bring his Department of War down on Chicago. Because on Saturday, Trump shared yet another bad AI-generated image of his face on someone else's body, but it appeared to be a reference to the 1979 film Apocalypse Now, except the title read Chipocalypse Now. With Trump adding, I love the smell of deportations in the morning, Chicago about to find out why it's called the Department of War. And as you might imagine, that wasn't received well by many, including officials within Illinois, including Governor J.B. Pritzker. With him responding on X, the President of the United States is threatening to go to war with an American city. This is not a joke. This is not normal. Donald Trump isn't a strong man. He's a scared man. Illinois won't be intimidated by a wannabe dictator. And you have that sentiment being echoed by Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, as well as Illinois Senator Dick Durbin. And all of this is made worse because this threat, it follows weeks of comments from Team Trump about sending troops into cities led by Democrats across the country. Very similar to what he's done in D.C., with Chicago being one of the most talked about targets. And that's also as immigration enforcement operations are set to ramp up within the city, which then led to thousands of protesters gathering to the streets of Chicago on Saturday, and a couple hundred even blocked an ICE processing center at one point. But then all of that, it brings us to yesterday when, for whatever reason, you saw Trump walking back his threat of war in Chicago.
That's fake news. When you say that, darling, that's fake news.
Well, why would the Department of Defense?
Listen, be quiet. Listen. You don't listen. You never listen. That's why you're second rate. We're not going to war. We're going to clean up our cities. We're going to clean them up so they don't kill 5 people every weekend. That's not war. That's common sense.
Though that, of course, flies in the face of everyone saying when the president says he's going to crack down on someone, believe it. Noting that he has a tendency to say what he means, even if it's extreme, then pulling back, and then slowly, whatever the norm is, shifts to the more extreme. Right? In this angle of Trump declaring war on Democratic cities, or whatever way he kind of frames it, you should definitely expect and prepare for more of it, because him being tough on crime is the thing he's least worst being pulled on right now. Right? According to an aggregate of polls about Trump's approval on major issues, very down on trade, very down on the economy, very down on foreign policy, but only a little down when it comes to crime and immigration. He is still in the negatives there, but only by a little, and it looks like they're seeing that as a place of opportunity. But as far as if that's going to be successful or not, or he's going to alienate even more people, we'll have to wait to see. But then in a 1-minute break that helps keep the show free, let me say, have you ever noticed how paying off debt, it feels like running on a treadmill that somehow speeds up every time you step on it? You pay a bill, feel good, and then bam, interest, late fees, surprise charges. And well, it's not luck. The system is built to keep you stuck. Credit card companies, banks, lenders, they profit while you stress. But today's sponsor, PDS Debt, they flipped the script. Credit cards handled, personal loans covered, medical bills, yeah, they help people actually escape the debt trap. No credit score hoops, no shame, just a plan designed for your situations by humans who actually care. And hundreds of thousands of people have already worked with PDS Debt to take control of their finances, and it's not just marketing talk, it works. PDS Debt is A+ rated with a Better Business Bureau, and they have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot, solid credibility. Right? And they're more than a lifeline. They help you step by step to regain control of your money. I mean, if I was where I used to be, PDS Debt is where I'd go. But hey, you're just 30 seconds away from starting your first step to getting debt free. Go get your free assessment and find the best option for you right now at pdsdebt.com/DeFranco, or scan that QR code. That's pdsdebt.com/DeFranco, and that QR code is on screen, so scan that thing and take the first step. But then next up in the news from that, we've got to talk about how Russia just hit Ukraine with its largest aerial attack of the war, hitting the main government building in Kyiv and reportedly killing at least 5 people across the country, including a mom and her baby. And as far as the United States of it all, Trump, he possibly might maybe consider doing something to ramp up the pressure on Putin, especially as it appears he's growing more and more frustrated with the Russian leader. Right? Last week, he even accused Putin, as well as Chinese President Xi Jinping, of joining with North Korea to, quote, conspire against the United States. Though for all of that, his threats to punish Russia have so far been empty. More than one deadline that he set for Putin has come and gone without consequence. And I mean, his most aggressive measure so far was instead directed towards India, where he slapped imports from India with 50% tariffs in response to the country's continued purchase of Russian oil. And through all of Trump's back and forth words on this, Putin, I mean, he's acted like he's getting ready for this war to last a lot longer. He's reportedly opened 2 new drone factories in at least 2 cities over the past year. And according to Ukraine's military intelligence agency, Russia now produces 2,700 Iranian-designed Shahed drones every month, which then makes it not that much of a surprise to learn that Russia's been setting new records nearly every month for the number of weapons launched, including, of course, yesterday. And with all that, you had Ukrainian President Zelensky saying that attack involved more than 800 drones and 13 missiles, and adding, such killings now, when real diplomacy could have already begun long ago, are a deliberate crime and a prolongation of the war. It has been repeatedly said in Washington that sanctions will follow a refusal to talk, and then adding, we must implement everything that was agreed in Paris. Right, and what he's referring to there is the meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing last week, where you had the French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that 26 nations formally committed to be present on the ground, in the sea, or in the air as a reassurance force in Ukraine the day after a ceasefire or peace. So that is one, Macron claimed that some of the remaining coalition members had not yet taken a position, and two, with that, major countries like Poland, Germany, and Italy, along with the US, of course, are among those who have declared they will not put troops on the ground in Ukraine, even if a deal is reached. Though you have France, the UK, and the tiny Baltic states of Estonia and Lithuania suggesting they might actually deploy troops in a post-war Ukraine. And with that, Macron later clarified that some of the countries involved in providing security guarantees would do so while remaining in NATO member countries or by making their bases available. Though I will say from some of the reporting that we've seen so far, the overall number of troops on the ground in Ukraine would reportedly be more than 10,000, and they'd be split into two main groups. One would provide training and assistance to the Ukrainian military, and the second would act as a separate reassurance force meant to discourage a future Russian invasion. And so with all that, you had Zelensky obviously praising the plan, though notably we're still waiting for a clear statement from Trump on whether the plan has his support and what, if any, kind of backup can be expected from the US military. Because Trump, he has seemingly warmed to the idea of the US providing some form of security guarantee to Ukraine, though not boots on the ground, but possibly in the form of air power. So you have that, and you also have US officials reportedly telling their European counterparts that the US could provide intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. But again, it's ultimately going to be up to Trump, and we really haven't heard anything solid from him. And in fact, last week, you had the US ending support for programs that were all about helping our armies in Eastern Europe prepare for a potential Russian offensive. And so it's not surprising that you've got people